President Trump canceled the North Korea summit over open hostility, as he put it, from Kim Jong Un and his regime. However, President Trump hinting that talks could begin again if North Korea were willing to change course.
In harmony, prosperity, and peace. That bright and beautiful future can only happen when the threat of nuclear weapons is removed. No way it can happen otherwise. If and when Kim Jong Un chooses to engage in constructive dialogue and actions, I am waiting.
And North Korea didn't wait very long, inviting a handful of journalists to observe as their nuclear site was, quote unquote, dismantled. We know 3 explosions took place, but there were no nuclear experts there, no weapons experts. And those who watched from afar, halfway around the globe, suggesting this is all more symbolic than practical, but that's the sort of blather that you hear from people who don't know anything. Some believe the Hermit Kingdom may have sites that they're not disclosing. And in 2008, they did blow up a cooling tower. Negotiations fell through nonetheless. Joining us tonight, Congressman Lee Zeldin. He serves on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. He's calling for the appointment of a second special counsel to investigate an absolutely corrupted Department of Justice and FBI leadership. Good to have you here, Congressman.
Great to be back.
It didn't take but hours for the North Koreans to respond, and now they want to talk after the president said there will be no June 12th summit. Your thoughts?
It's important to treat our friends as our friends and our adversaries as our adversaries. Understanding our adversaries do not respect weakness, they only respect strength. And when we say you can't be silent, it's not because we want wars, but it's because we want to make sure that we're able to prevent it. And the president, in approaching this entire situation in North Korea, knows that the North Koreans and these other nations will only respect the United States and President Trump if we go into it from a position of strength. And our hand just became stronger with the president showing a willingness not only to walk away from the summit if the North Koreans continue with these antics, and the Chinese possibly as well, but military force is an option. And with that being a real option, I think strengthens his hands as far as diplomacy and the economic pressure.
And the president conveyed today, I thought, absolutely no suggestion whatsoever of anger. He was constrained, even as he basically was threatening the North Koreans with their own destruction, and managed at the same time to validate again the terms of a summit, which are very straightforward. This president said it and said it again and again today. You will denuclearize, and that is non-negotiable.
And remember where we were just a few years ago. Yeah. President Obama negotiating with Iran and negotiating from a position of weakness. Red lines getting crossed. Iran using rhetoric like calling us the great Satan, chanting death to America, still illegally test firing intercontinental ballistic missiles. And you remember when they took our sailors and embarrassed them with photos and videography.
Embarrassed this nation.
And Secretary Kerry said, thank you. That was his response. Not anymore. And President...
By the way, the congressman is not just using an aside there. That is an exact quote from Secretary of State Kerry.
Thank you. Thank you. President Trump, though, is showing that this is not that. He's setting red lines. He's being strong, but he was not provocative. Last August, when he was talking about fire and fury, the fact is, if North Korea attacked the United States, they would be met with fire and fury. And while we're here in
or any of our allies,
and we're here in our country, and we're asking, is Kim Jong Un crazy enough? Is he to do this or to do that? I think Kim Jong Un was over North Korea saying, you know what? I think Donald Trump is crazy enough to attack me. And by making that military option look real, and with the state of the economy, and even in last August when Ambassador Haley and President Trump, they were able to get a unanimous UN Security Council resolution passed that even China and North Korea voted for.
You know, you said President Trump is crazy enough. I think he's
I think Kim Jong Un is saying that.
I think Kim Jong Un right now and his regime understand that this president is smart enough, determined enough, and courageous enough to do exactly what he is intimating. And I think that I've never seen a clearer example of the man's collected cool, his constraint than today, because he had to be furious in some measure. He did not in any way allow anyone to see that anger that he might possess. I would say almost surely possesses. But I think he has made his mind up, and I think that's got to scare the hell out of the Koreans. Yeah. And by the way, I think it scares the hell out of Xi Jinping. And I think he's learning a lesson here, perhaps a more profound lesson than even Kim Jong Un.
I will say this. First off, Kim Jong Un is known to be homicidal, not suicidal. And I think that's part of his calculation as well. And without disclosing any confidence, yesterday I traveled with President Trump to Long Island. And there were a couple of times while I was with him that I broached the topic of North Korea. And all I'll say is this. He knows exactly what he's doing. He is thinking through this. It is incredibly important to him, but it's very deliberate. Mm-hmm. And he's calm, cool, and collected and strong. And I believe that his decision today was necessary to let the North Koreans know that they are not in charge. Yeah. They're not going to roll the United States the way that the Iranians rolled the United States 3 years ago.
I think this president made that clear in his first year in office. I really do. He served notice that he is not in any part in the order of succession of the incompetent presidents that we've had in office. Think about this. 3 presidents in a row. 3 of the worst presidents we've had in our country's history. That is Clinton, that is Bush, and that is Obama. And this country is very, very lucky that this is our president now.
Right, and he understands the art of the deal. He also understands the need to prioritize America first in these negotiations. And he's also talking about how important this is for the world. He's exercising leadership on the world stage. I remember going to Israel in August of 2015, meeting with Bibi, and saying, this guy was reluctantly the leader of the free world. We don't have one right now. Right now, we have a leader of the free world, and he's our president.
Absolutely. Congressman Lee Zeldin, good to have you with us.
Great to be back.
Thank you.